That's how we do it. Yeah.
In Chinese culture, xiuxian is a fascinating term and the hottest topic. People crave xiuxian for two reasons: immortality and the desire to obtain power beyond the mundane world. But what is an immortal? Has anyone ever seen a real immortal? Could it be that the so-called immortals are not humanoid, but rather a kind of existence beyond human cognition? They could be a pile of flesh intertwined by men, women, and animals, or a gluttonous nun surrounded by swollen fat maggots and flies. They could also be a bodhisattva who appears pure on the surface, but in reality has tentacles wrapped around their body, sucking on fragrances and thirsty desires. If immortals are like this, what about those who practice xiuxian? In this video, we recommend a book that I have seen in recent years that is the most bizarre and craziest Cthulhu xiuxian novel. The protagonist, Li Huawang, is a high school student who suffers from hallucinations and perception disorders. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital in his city by his parents. However, Li Huawang has a secret buried deep in his heart that he has not told anyone. He is actually not sick at all. The so-called delusion is actually him soul traveling to another world. He crossed over to a terrifying xiuxian world and discovered that he could bring items from the xiuxian world back to the real world, earning him a huge fortune. But he also realized that this xiuxian world was not an illusion, but a real world. His actions there would be synchronously executed in real life, which brought him great danger and pressure. In the other world, Li Huawang is a shabby Taoist disciple, locked up with hundreds of dirty and disabled fellow apprentices. Their only job every day is to assist their master, Dan Yangzi, in refining medicine, grinding stones, and smashing herbs. They only get one cold steamed bun per meal. If that wasn't bad enough, the most important part of Dan Yangzi's medicine-making process is human sacrifice. Yes, these Taoist disciples are also ingredients. Every once in a while, Dan Yangzi picks a group of living people and throws them into a huge medicine-refining tank, smashing them into pieces alive. Dan Yangzi was the first xiuxian practitioner that Li Huawang encountered when he arrived in this strange world. He practices foolishness. Before deciding to become an xiuxian practitioner, Dan Yangzi was an illiterate bandit who was cruel and violent, murdering and raping people. He only became an xiuxian practitioner to satisfy his own greedy desires. Fortunately, he stumbled upon two things that could pave his way to immortality: an unknown celestial book, and his daughter, a young girl whose organs were stored in a vase. Dan Yangzi couldn't read, so he had to rely on his daughter to decipher the medicine formulas in the celestial book for him to refine medicine. However, in reality, the girl in the vase couldn't understand the celestial book either. In order to please Dan Yangzi and not be abandoned by him, she made up non-existent medicine formulas to assist him in refining medicine, and the most frequently mentioned ingredient was the living human. The protagonist has the ability to travel back and forth between two worlds, which sounds cool, but remember the previous setting? The two worlds are synchronous, meaning that if he eats an apple in the real world, his body in the xiuxian world will make the same movement. It's just that he might not be eating an apple in that world. Similarly, if he kills demons and monsters in the xiuxian world, his body in reality may be holding a knife and charging into a crowd. It sounds terrifying just thinking about it. Therefore, Li Huawang's life is very difficult. Whenever he soul travels to the strange world, his body in the psychiatric hospital falls into a state of hysterical delusion. When he comes to, his body in the xiuxian world becomes unclear and he speaks incoherently. Dan Yangzi notices that his disciple Li Huawang is going insane all day long, so he gives him a lump of black, sticky substance, claiming that it can suppress hysteria. Li Huawang is forced to swallow this lump, but he discovers that the time he spends in reality is shortened, which terrifies him. In order to get rid of this nightmare, Li Huawang decides to kill his master, Dan Yangzi. In order to gain exclusive interpretation rights to the celestial book, Li Huawang killed the girl in the vase and used his advantage of being literate to gain his master's favor. He lied and claimed that the medicine materials should also include highly toxic substances such as arsenic and sulfur, hoping to poison Dan Yangzi. On the day when the medicine was finished, Dan Yangzi pretended to be friendly and handed the highly toxic pill to Li Huawang, who fearlessly swallowed it. However, the drug quickly took effect, and both of them began to emit white steam all over their bodies, writhing in agony. Dan Yangzi tried to use the inner and outer peripheral circulation method to digest the drug, but unfortunately this method was also made up by Li Huawang and was therefore ineffective. Li Huawang passed out in pain, and when he woke up, he found himself in the hospital, undergoing gastric lavage treatment. He thought he had been saved, but he quickly lost himself again between virtuality and reality. Later, he saw a terrible change in his master Dan Yangzi in the Xiuxian world. Dan Yangzi's body was covered in tar-stuck feathers, like sharp thorns coming out of his flesh. This is the symbol of the 3 flowers on top, indicating that he has become an immortal. The sharp feathers indicate that he has undergone the process of feathering and ascending to immortality. 3 different voices came out of Dan Yangzi's 3 mouths. So that's it. I understand now. The next second, Dan Yangzi's swollen body exploded, blood and flesh splattering all over the training room. Before he died, Dan Yangzi experienced various anomalies. Perhaps he really died, or perhaps he had already become an immortal. However, Li Huawang would gradually realize that his illness was much more severe than his master's. Afterwards, the protagonist Li Huawang escorted his fellow disciples home with his master's magical weapons. In this strange world, Li Huawang's life was in danger, but the mental pressure was even more painful than physical torture. Since leaving the cave, his mental state has become extremely unstable. Sometimes, he fights for his life 1 second, and the next second, he's back in the psychiatric hospital. Even the sliced fruit his mother feeds him can turn into iron nails that tear his mouth apart. In the middle of the story, Li Huawang realizes that the so-called real world is actually an illusion, but he can't bear to abandon the parents who raised him for more than 10 years. The story is still being serialized, with a rich and full plot. Even just reading the free trial of the first few chapters will surely satisfy readers who love Lovecraftian-style writing. Below, I will give a brief introduction to the worldview of this book, which contains spoilers. If you are ready, continue reading. In this strange world, a situation similar to the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms has led to wars, excessive taxes, and various problems, causing the people to suffer. Ordinary people are aware of the existence of supernatural powers, among which 2 gods originate from the folk beliefs of the northeast of China. The 5 lines correspond to foxes, yellow weasels, hedgehogs, snakes, and mice. In this world, these folk beliefs are real, and those who practice them will enslave the practitioners as puppets until they die. The representative of Buddhism is the Zhengde Temple, but because the protagonist is a time traveler with a low san value, a term that refers to one's mental stability, he easily sees through the true nature of the temple. He witnessed the horrifying sight of a wriggling flesh mountain made up of white flesh and quickly fled the temple. However, the flesh and blood Arhat transformed by the monks immediately chased after him. In the end, Dan Yangzi, who had already ascended to immortality, appeared in the protagonist's hallucinations and tore apart these horrifying statues. Bagui is a god worshipped through pain. Only by enduring extreme pain can one catch a glimpse of Bagui. The lightest form of worship is using bamboo to pry open one's fingernails and chewing on broken iron nails with an empty mouth. More extreme methods include sacrificing one's own flesh and blood relatives. Afterwards, the protagonist learns the ability to sacrifice to Bagui, which becomes his most commonly used attack method. From then on, losing an eye or a hand is just a commonplace occurrence for Li Huawang. Another Buddhist faction is the An-ci Temple, which is controlled by gluttonous nuns. All the nuns in An-ci Temple are heavyweights, as fat as pigs, lying and sitting all day while eating. Due to their lack of hygiene, layers of fat emit a foul smell, and mosquitoes and flies hover around them. If Dan Yangzi represents foolishness, then these nuns embody gluttony, greed, and filth. However, unlike their appearance, An-ci Temple is one of the few friendly forces in the book, and its leader, Reverend Jing Xin, has a time-traveling son. Although her skinny and malnourished son has been lost and wandering for decades, always wanting to return to the real world, these nuns also know that all of this is just the time traveler's imagination and confusion. The only comical force in the book is the Zhuo Wang Dao, a group of fraudulent cultists. The source of their survival is the pleasure they derive from deceiving others. In order to deceive someone, they can even break their own hands and feet, pretending to be beggars, risking their lives, and even marrying and having children with their targets, gambling with their own lives, all for the momentary pleasure of successfully deceiving someone. In the plot, Zhuo Wang Dao kills all the villagers in a town, massacres the elder of the Ao Jing sect, and replaces him, all just to fool the protagonist, Li Huawang. Thank you for watching this video. If you are interested in elements such as Chinese-style Lovecraftian horror, fantasy, and suspense, then this novel is definitely worth reading. Finally, if you want to learn more about Chinese literature, games, and anime, you can follow my YouTube channel, where I will regularly release related videos. Thank you for listening and supporting my work. Lastly, let's enjoy a music video about the Zhuo Wang Dao, produced by Chinese netizens.
哈哈，时空你来的就去吧的啊！嘿，夜里摆山头，勾践大背是谁的手？马起担子就跟头走，一不做二不休。嘿，夜里摆山头，胡言乱语都猜不透。喜怒哀乐就穿心口，忘情忘道忘春秋。天上飞蛾子，地上跑豹子，你我干啥子要上山发财？有病莫乱投，坟地上乱游，白蜡做山头，阴沟落进海字头。说得轻巧，吃根灯草，听到风就是雨，跟我鬼扯夜扯。几根糖，不是不登三宝殿，穿得烂个个都装进罗汉。雾里看花花不在，满天过海到蓬莱，桂花啦有人心怀，你别大惊小怪，不然与你染尘埃，都是肉眼看凡胎，哪有真假和黑白，我一素雅沧海。嘿，夜里摆山头，勾践大背是谁的手？马起担子就跟头走，一不做二不休。嘿，夜里摆山头，胡言乱语都猜不透。喜怒哀乐就穿心口，忘情忘道忘春秋。龙凤起，花花起，日月起，出来飘的人都想打个好字起，不怕老子有三张脸，只怕有些人气两样心，当面是人背后是鬼，唱一出粪土里滚口水，天生不拉地生不熟，夜路走多了谨防被天收。有钱能使鬼推